So in this video, we're going to dive into a lot of cool aspects of nonverbal communication. Now, just kind of an overview. I think I've covered this in other videos, but nonverbal communication conveys the relational dimension of our messages, so how we feel about others and our relationship with them. And our nonverbal messages, again, are the outward expression of our emotional state. Unless we are faking our expression and showing a disingenuous emotional state, one we're not actually feeling. But typically, what we see people expressing nonverbally, is how they're feeling emotionally, which is kind of fascinating. So we've talked about emotions, let's go into nonverbal communication. So, when you think about the emotions we experience and express, when you look at someone who's if you just go watch people, go to an airport, watch people, the emotions they're expressing, and you see a variety there. What you see expressed is a combination of evolutionary and cultural forces. So first, the evolutionary. I already talked about that in the emotion video, that the emotions we have are here for a reason. They've evolved to help us solve what is called adaptive problems. In other words, to adapt to our environment. So I don't need to add a lot there. But the cultural part I haven't talked about, and that's where we get into how we communicate nonverbally. The way we express our emotions is a result of how we are socialized during our upbringing. So certain behaviors get reinforced by parents, certain other behaviors are encouraged. This is not the same as traits. This is just how we express the emotions we're feeling. So the way we shape them, or the way we express our emotions is shaped by our parents. And so think about, if you want to see just pure emotional expression with no shaping from parents, look at little kids. How do they express their happiness? Or if they want to laugh at other people, how do they express that? They're pretty blatant about it. How do we express it? Why don't we do the same thing little kids do? Why don't we laugh at other people? Just out loud laughing and pointing. Why don't we do that? Because we've been taught not to. And that's the cultural force. That's how we've been socialized. So, all around the planet, human beings kind of have capacity for the same emotions, but the way we are socialized to express those emotions really varies from culture to culture. That's why you see a lot of intercultural differences in communication. Partly why, it's not the entire reason why, but some cultures, people are more reserved in how they express their emotions. Some are more outgoing than we are. So, and there could be subcultures within cultures, like just across the United States, there could be different subcultures within that. So anyway, it's kind of fascinating that we all have the same set of emotions, but depending on where we are raised, we are taught to express them differently. What is considered appropriate and inappropriate could be very different depending on the culture we're raised in. It's pretty fascinating. So, as we grow up, we get better at modifying and sculpting our emotional expression to fit what is expected in our culture. You do not have to define all of these in your notes. I'm going to go really pretty quickly. So, we're taught to make our expressions more intense. So let's say that someone gets us a gift, okay? Little kids, they're just like, whatever. If it's a gift that they're kind of whatever about. What if it's a gift we're whatever about? No, we're taught to intensify our happiness about it. We're taught to tone down or de-intensify at times, or not show any emotion at all at times. That's inhibition. Simulate an emotion, that means pretend to be something we're not. We're taught to mask emotions, so that's like showing one emotion when we're really feeling another. So, and then I give the example. I've been talking about children versus versus adults. You think about it, kids see someone trip in the mall, they will just laugh and point and giggle. And we might do that on the inside because sometimes it's funny, but we don't express it. Why? because through socialization, through our parents and others, we've been taught to do these things to make our emotions look appropriate in the culture we are in. So by the time we're adults, we do these things a lot, and we learn to do them. And honestly, where the most of that progress takes place is during our teenage years. That's where, for example, one of the last of these abilities we really develop is masking, to show one emotion when we're feeling another, and we tend to develop that in our teenager years. So think about it. I actually have, this is a little pet theory on why those teenage years can be so difficult. As children, we're oblivious to how we look to others. Adults, we really know. Teenagers, we're finding out. Like, oh my God, like that's embarrassing, and that's also because we reach reproductive age in those years. That's when some of those evolutionary forces, can be really strong. So the need, certain needs to like belong, when you fear missing out is probably it's worse during our teenage years, I would argue. I don't base that in any research, but it gets pretty intense there. We need to feel like we really belong, and not like that goes away as adults. And certainly it's there in a different version with children, but we need to belong with our parents. Teenagers, it's more we need to belong in groups outside of the home. So teenagers are, I think, partly confusing just because there's so much transition going on there. There's so much waking up to, how we fit into our world. So anyway, I'm not going to go too much further on that. But the key thing to keep in mind is that children and adults express their emotions very differently. If you want to see just the pure evolutionary, shape, how we would express emotions, children are it. Like, they'll just do whatever. But adults, we've been shaped, we've been socialized to look appropriate in our culture. That's not always a good thing, probably, but it is what it is. All right. So, nonverbal communication, how is it typically taught? Typically, I'd have a slide for, a lot of people would have slides for face and eye behavior, gestures and movements, body orientation. Are we facing towards someone or away from someone? How we use time, how we use personal space. Are we close to someone? Are we far away? Silence. How do we use silence to communicate things? Like putting a pause somewhere to get someone's attention. So, artifacts, those are things we have in our environment. The pictures we hang up in our room, posters we hang in our room, those types of things are artifacts that communicate something about us to other people. There's a problem with teaching it that way, though, and that is, if you watch somebody nonverbally, you're not looking at all of these things. You're not looking at all of these things like, oh, what did the face do? What's the face doing? Oh, now I'm going to look at gestures. Now I'm going to look at how the body's oriented. We do it all at the same time, simultaneously. So it's hard to understand eye behavior without understanding all the other kinds of behavior. So I don't find it very useful. Instead, what I do is look at different functions that nonverbal messages serve, because we make more global impressions on those. And then I focus on how do we modify our expressions when we need to accomplish things in our environment. So I'll get more into that later. All right, so functions of nonverbal messages. So one, they can provide context to nonverbal messages, and it's why texting can be problematic. How do we take what someone says? We look at what they're doing nonverbally. They can help us regulate interaction. Putting your index finger up, just being very silent. You want someone to be quiet. Quit nodding your head and be really quiet yourself. If you want someone to stop talking, quit nodding your head along with them because that just encourages them. And just be stone silent. It's hard to do, but eventually they'll be like, okay, they're not getting reinforced in any way for anything they're saying, so eventually they'll stop. At least the ones who can read nonverbal cues. We know some can't. All right, convey relational messages, often in ways that words can't. A good example is providing support. Like if you're at a funeral service or something, there really isn't much you can say, but just being there, putting a hand on someone's shoulder, giving them a hug, whatever, that conveys a lot about the relationship in ways that no words are going to be able to do at that point in time. You can communicate approach and avoidance signals to others. if you've ever been in an elevator and tried to wall yourself off from other people, then you understand this. That you can communicate distance. You also can communicate that you're open to being talked to. So that can go both ways. So, kind of going on with this, I'm going to talk about 3 different kind of groupings of nonverbal cues that give off certain impressions. You're not going to have to memorize. Each of them has kind of a long list of nonverbal behaviors. You're not going to have to memorize each list, so I wouldn't take notes on each specific list. But when I go through these 3, I would look for key differences between them, because some of them would be some of the same things. So I would look for differences between them. So first, immediacy is a perception of physical and psychological closeness with others. That should be or. So perception of physical and or psychological closeness with others. What's that mean? We actually feel physically close to them, or psychologically we feel like a closeness with them. So there's a lot of research in teacher-student communication about how when teachers are immediate, students like that. They feel like teachers, at least psychologically closer to them. So how do we do this if we want to give this impression? Honestly, it's moderate. A lot of these things in moderation. Eye contact, smiling, shoulders facing someone, a little bit of gestures, a relaxed posture. Now I wouldn't treat this like a checklist where I want to be immediate. I need to do eye contact, then smiling, then shoulder. No, these are just some examples. You try to get a decent number of this list, but you don't necessarily need to do 100% of these things to give that impression. So that is one type of impression we give to others, is how immediate we are. And in terms of outcomes, take your pick. I mean, managers, teachers, whatever, when immediacy is perceived, other people tend to like us better. They tend to think we're better teachers, better managers, and it tends to help build relationships better because it's very inviting. And the downside, so what's the downside? People are going to talk to you more. If you're immediate, people are going to talk to you more. So that's one. There are a lot of good that can come out of it, and if you need to not have a bunch of people talking to you, then immediacy might not be the way to go in a certain situation. So there's one. Composure is another, and that is, we kind of know what composure is. It looks like someone who's relaxed and can handle something. So this is I would say a little bit more relaxed than immediacy, not quite so outgoing looking. That's where you see relaxed body, relaxed pleasant voice. Adapters are nervous things like fidgeting, running fingers through one's hair, those types of things. So there's fewer of those. And they don't talk necessarily that long, shorter speaking. So that conveys this sense that a person has their act together. They're kind of composed. They're not too worried about things. So you see kind of an absence of anxiety or intensity in this, and that's useful. Dominance. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It can be, but this is just someone, who nonverbally looks like they're in charge. So a couple of things that are different from other lists. There's leaning backwards, less head nodding, taking longer speaking turns, and those types of things. That's someone who kind of is taking a little bit more charge of a situation. So again, you don't have to memorize or even take notes on this whole entire list, but kind of see some of the ways it differs from the other 2 lists.